because it reminds me that by claiming the name Universalist, I am saying that I know deep in my core that all are held in love, and that I must participate in growing and sharing that love. And so I find myself called to acknowledge that those gifts gathered and built in times of abundance are not just for me. These gifts are not just for us. These gifts are for the flourishing of life and the triumph of love. These gifts are for the poor and the anguished and the desolate. They are to be used in service of justice and mercy and humility. Remember what Ram Dass said. He said, "I make the effort to see the beloved in everyone and to serve the beloved through everyone, including the earth. I often fail in these aspirations," he says, "because I lose the balance between separateness and unity. I get lost in my separateness and I feel afraid, but I make the effort." It's not easy to maintain this balance, to shepherd our own lives while being open to the needs and lives of others. Ram Dass invokes the images of separation and unity that call to mind for me the words of the Christian theologian Paul Tillich. In his sermon, he preached a sermon called "You Are Accepted," and he outlines his theology of sin and grace. Now, I know those words, those concepts they're certainly difficult ones, and many of us Unitarian Universalists, especially those of us with theologies grounded in naturalism and humanism, might have a really big struggle with those words, that word sin. How do you feel about that word sin? But listen to what Tillich says about sin. He says sin is separation. To be in the state of sin is to be in the state of separation, and the separation is threefold. There is separation among individual lives, separation of a person from themselves, and separation of all from the ground of being. This threefold separation, he says, is the fate of every life. Which is a little too much for me, but it's something to pay attention to. Human beings, though, have guilt as well as fate. He says, because we can participate in that separation. We can make it worse. When we shun others, when we laugh at others, when we believe ourselves better than others, we are contributing to our separation from them and from ourselves and our separation from the ground of our being, however we conceive it. He wrote this sermon in the late 1940s, after the end of the Second World War and the fall of Hitler's Germany, from which he himself escaped. But the separation, he says, need not to be so huge to be meaningful or destructive. When I was in college, I worked during the summers as a shift supervisor at a fast food hamburger restaurant. I will admit, A&W. I was routinely stunned and saddened by watching how poorly many customers treated the cashiers who took their orders. With some, it was just a routine lack of courtesy. They were in a hurry and they just didn't see another human being in front of them, just a vending machine, basically, who would give them food and quickly. A couple of those were downright abusive. I intervened in one situation where the customer had made a mistake in ordering for his family and then had thrown the hamburger into the face of the cashier, seeing her not as a fellow human being doing a very hard job, but someone beneath him who should serve him perfectly and know what he meant, even if he didn't say it well. How we act and interact with those around us as we do our daily work. How do we do that? Do we treat everyone as a human being, or do we help increase the separation? Tillich goes on and broadens his view of separation beyond the individual and individual relationships to the separation expressed through, as he says, the attitude of social groups within nations toward each other, and the attitude of nations themselves toward other nations. He says the madness of the German Nazis and the cruelty of the lynching mobs in the South proved too easy an excuse for us to turn our thoughts from our own selves. But let us just consider ourselves and what we feel when we read this morning and tonight that in some sections of Europe, all children under the age of 3 are sick and dying. The strangeness of life to life is evident in the strange fact that we can know all of this and yet live today, this morning, tonight, as though we were completely ignorant. Harsh words, he says. But for him, as much as sin and separation abounded, he felt St. Paul was right when he said there was a greater abounding of grace, which for Tillich was the reunion of life with life, the reconciliation of the self with itself. For life, he says, belongs to life. Now, there are pieces of Tillich's theology which I struggle with. We come from very different traditions. But the idea of reaching across separation, of remembering that life belongs to life, that I am not actually different from the person who is showing me their pain or their anger or their hatred, that idea reminds me to pause and breathe and reach out in love and humility rather than in anger or fear. To understand that responding to the world by hoarding my abundance only widens this separation. It's hard work to remember to do this. It's hard work to do this, and the world doesn't want us to do this. We're barraged by messages of scarcity and fear and incompleteness. Watch television, even for a short time, and you'll be inundated by ads where cars and homes turn into fortresses, by security systems, inundated by the faces and voices of politicians telling us to be afraid of each other. And there's an old Hasidic story that stuck with me since I read it as a teenager. It tells the tale of a rabbi who once asked his pupils how they could tell when the night had ended and the day had begun. Could it be, asked one of his students, that when you see an animal in the distance, you can tell whether it's a sheep or a dog? No, said the rabbi. Another student asked, is it when you can look at a tree in the distance and tell whether it's a fig tree or a peach tree? No, said the rabbi. Then what is it? The pupils inquired, getting a little ticked off at their enigmatic teacher. It's when you can look in the face of any person and see that they are your kin. Because if you cannot see this, it is still night. And so, as we pause at this moment of equinox, this instance of balance, as we pause and take abundance, and take stock of the abundance of the summer and the harvest, I ask that we take time to contemplate and ask ourselves not, how will I make it through the winter? But what gifts can I bring to myself, to my family, to the person sitting next to me who may be in pain, to my neighbors, to my community, to strangers on the street? What gift can I bring? We are headed toward the darkest time of the year, a time of long nights and short days, and we daily face the pain of darkness in our own lives and the lives of our communities, in the lives of our planet. May we be instruments of grace, of unity, of reaching to each other. May the gifts that we bring from our individual and collective abundance be gifts that bring peace and hope and love to a world sorely in need. Blessed be. Let's sing now together. You've been sitting long enough. So why don't you stand in body or spirit and join in singing hymn number 404. What gift can we bring?